Okay, all right. Okay, so thank you everyone, and welcome to this panel, which is connected to my Marie Curie project at KU Leuven, Lagos Tech, which is a project in social anthropology, which is trying to explore the relationships between humans and technology in Lagos and in Nigeria, and the local innovations idea and so on. So this panel for today, since my project actually started not too long ago, just in April, in this panel, we are trying to give more space to people which have already done a lot of research in society and technology in Africa. And we have 5 people today. And well, first of all, I want to thank the organizer of LSA because they did a very big effort. Professor said that they didn't, first of all, but all the volunteers and all the people working at this conference, which is getting bigger and bigger every year. And in the spirit of the LSA, and I agree with Professor Aderinto when he says that obviously this is not to show off too much of our knowledge. This is not really about an examination or a PhD dissertation. This is more about a discussion. This is more about students and local students. So we are really looking for your questions, and we are here to just connect with you and to discuss with you. So I've been saying that we have more or less 10 minutes. We can go a little bit overboard if there are any technical problems. It's more or less okay, and then we will have time for our questions, which I really care about for. So the first person to be speaking today will be Tessa Pinaker. I hope I pronounced your surname in the right way, and sorry if I didn't. So she's now a researcher at Verwey Jonker Institute, and she has a PhD from the University of Birmingham. The title of their intervention is Ghana's New Tech Elite, the production of Africanness as a contested extravertive tactic by technology hubs and incubator managers in Accra, in Ghana. So Tessa, I leave the floor to you, and thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I did notice the connection is still a bit glitchy perhaps, so let me know if you can't hear me all right during the presentation. I will now try to share my screen.
Okay.
Okay, is this working?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, great. Okay, and now I can just... And you can also see it move?
Yes. Everything is fine.
Thank you. This is my first online presentation, actually, post-corona or post-COVID. So yeah, thank you for having me today, and also thank you organizers for doing all this wonderful work, also with including the people who will be presenting online and join hybridly. I'm Tessa Pijnaker. As mentioned, I completed my PhD at the University of Birmingham last year, and since then I've been working at the Verwey Jonker Institute, which is a Dutch research institute. And today I will be presenting part of my PhD research. And I wanted to start by explaining this picture a little bit more. So what you see is the German former Chancellor Angela Merkel visiting one of the tech startups in Accra. And she was one of several European and American leaders who visited the tech hubs and incubators in Accra right before I started my PhD fieldwork. So, for instance, Mark Rutte from the Netherlands and Emmanuel Macron from France also visited these hubs and incubators. And what I want to do today in my talk is to try to make sense of these visits and these political alliances a little bit more. So hopefully that's what I'm going to do. And I also wanted to briefly explain for those who don't know what tech hubs and incubators are, roughly what they do and are. So in very basic terms, they are organizations that claim to support tech entrepreneurs and contribute to sustainable development by providing tech entrepreneurs with training, access to networks, and access to resources such as private sector funding. However, I will challenge this a little bit in my presentation, and I will really focus on the kind of political work that they do as well, because generally they have thus far been described as economic actors mostly. So that is going to be the main contribution of today. And before I continue with that, I will focus a bit on the methodology, then the theory on African elites, and then I will move to my data. So for this paper, I did 12 months of ethnographic fieldwork in 4 tech hubs and incubators in Accra from 2014 to 2015, which was for my master's research, and then from 2018 and 19 for my PhD research. And I collected photographs, field notes, interviews. And what I thought is important to point out is that, well, I generally did semi-structured interviews with senior managers of hubs and incubators. I chose to do unstructured interviews because these managers tend to give interviews and make all sorts of public appearances on an almost daily basis. So they give interviews to media outlets, they speak to representatives of foreign NGOs, they do all sorts of public activity, and they usually tell the same story over and over. So I really wanted to create some space for them to kind of air what's on their mind, their personal perspectives, and what emerged through this methodology was all sorts of conversations about political strategizing. So that's how I collected this material. Then in the past 2 decades, the conversation about African middle classes has reemerged. And within this debate, there has also been some attention to what distinguishes middle classes from elites. And partially, I follow Lenz's perspective that elites are different from middle classes because they have leading positions in the political sphere or in other societal fields in which they can influence decision making that affects larger groups. And I will hopefully show that hub and incubator managers have this kind of power. They tend to have transnational lifestyles. And I also use the work of Cooper and older work of Bayard and Ellis. And they say that Cooper has described that in the past, African elites have worked in government situations in what he calls the gatekeeper state. So a state that sat between a national territory and the rest of the world at a gate, collecting and distributing resources flowing through it, and relying on outside recognition to get these resources. And Bayard and Ellis have argued that elites at this gate used extravertive techniques, such as making some realities visible to outsiders and others not, to cope with this power imbalance. And one reason why I consider senior managers as a new elite that is emerging is because, well, they presented themselves publicly often as self-made men of the likes of the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, like people who started from nothing in their own garage. In fact, they led transnational lifestyles that tech entrepreneurs in my study marked as markedly different from the lives that tech entrepreneurs were leading. So these self-made men and sometimes women had engaged in very frequent travel. So they might be traveling to family business relationships in the United States or Europe, mostly on a say monthly basis. They would be away a lot. They also, more than usual in Accra or in Ghana, had interracial marriages or long-term relationships. And they had specific consumption patterns. So, for instance, they drove big SUV kind of cars, which tend to be associated with the political elites in Ghana or the foreign expat, like white business and NGO elite. And also specifically leisured in places that were associated with these groups. And they also, as I will show in a bit, had a lot of influence on the circumstances of especially lower ranked hub and incubator staff and tech entrepreneurs, because they had a lot of say in the programs that hub and incubators were rolling out. And more during the period of my study, they engaged in gatekeeping work to achieve this influence or maintain this influence. And to show you that, I will go back a little bit to the end 2000s and early 2010s. And this is the period where the first hubs and incubators in Accra were established. And I visited these newly established hubs and incubators in 2014, and the air was still buzzing with optimism. And they all generally wanted to achieve what they called sustainable development. And what they meant with that is that they thought that this hub and incubator model would eventually make enough revenue to run operations without relying on grants, support from NGOs, support from foreign or national governments, etc. And they based this idea of sustainable development that they would achieve on a few assumptions. I will mention some of them. So the infrastructure provided by hubs and incubators, so it was imagined, would make startups more rapidly grow than if they didn't have this infrastructure. So this would be like fast internet, electricity, all sorts of support. And this growth would result in revenue for the hub and incubator through rent, payment for services, and the increased value of startup shares, and also the sale of startups. And it was imagined that the training that these hubs and incubators provided, which tended to be American and European like focused, was universal and would aid entrepreneurs in startup success. However, in 2014 and 15, I already got some signs that this was not really working out as planned. A few years later, it became clear that actually the rate of failure is quite high in Ghana. So 74% of startups, even those who were celebrated as success stories, ended up eventually failing. I do want to point out, though, that actually compared to the United States or Europe, this is low, because in the United States or Europe, the failure rate is even higher. But still, this is a big amount of failure. And hubs and incubators tended to struggle to find entrepreneurs willing to pay for their services. So this whole model of extraction of revenue from entrepreneurs and their business growth was not working out. So when I came back to hubs and incubators in 2018-19, they all had developed new strategies to achieve this sustainability or sustainable development. So almost all of them had come to rely on various sources of foreign capital, usually in the form of grants or contracts that they obtained in bids for tender that covered the operational expenses of hubs and incubators. And of this funding, up to 70 to 90% went to funding the hub instead of flowing to the entrepreneurs. And usually, as part of these contracts, there was also a contractual obligation to produce success stories. So this leads to us because actually, because of the lack of initial success, as I just described, hubs kind of became stuck in this sort of closed loop model of being forced to produce a lot of success, with which I mean like a lot of media, spectacle, success stories at tech events, etc. And While in this position, hubs and incubators, just like gatekeeper states, recognition as being sort of at the gate. So they became reliant on outside recognition that they produced all these successful entrepreneurs, and also kind of produce this racial distinction to really assert their value. So they started to position themselves as places and institutions that were stabilizers of Africans, so they could live up to global standards. So they really try to show that in the hub, everything is stable and global, and outside, it's all unstable and messy and lacking standards. I'm not sure how much time I have left, but I wanted to read a quote of one of the hub managers, and the last bit is the most important. So hubs need to invest in the community to stabilize entrepreneurs. That is how we show our value in the ecosystem. Create a powerful position that allows us to demand something from investors. Right now, I can determine whether investors speak to the ladies, so the female entrepreneurs, or not, because I have what they are looking for. Without me, you can't speak to them. That is my value. So he really asserted himself as this gatekeeper, stabilizing entrepreneurs. And this was also portrayed in all sorts of imagery and aesthetics. So, for instance, on the left side of these pictures, you see how Angela Merkel again is interacting with these entrepreneurs in a highly stylized setting, so with African prints, but in a professional attire. And below, Bono, who is a famous pop star musician, is visiting our hub and in Accra, and everybody is portrayed as very cheery and happy, again, also in sort of smart clothing. And these images are supposed to be aspirational and inspirational, and also convey that, oh, in this hub and incubator as an African, you get this global, like this recognition from important white people. And on the right, you see two images of the design, interior design of hubs and incubators. And this design is meant to convey that these are global office spaces where which can be aspirational for Ghanaians who want to achieve middle class status, but also they are meant to make visitors from abroad feel comfortable because they are supposed to look like they can be anywhere. And I want to read
Sorry,
another
Tessa.
quote.
Sorry, Tess, if we can go to the conclusion, we are
Yes, I'm almost done, so that's great. So I wanted to end with that George Nunya, another hub manager, also emphasized that you want to be seen as an authentic Ghanaian institution, but you don't want to play too much into the West. And he said, so that in that way, he wanted to establish power that is like away from the Ghanaian government. I will read the final bit and then end. So we change the balance. When there's a global puppet game around engaging young people, most people think we are tools, but we are also active shapers. We're able to engage directly with the German government and its actors independent from the Ghanaian government. That's a shift in the balance of power. This is a shift in how aid works, building a power block independent of government. So that's the kind of political work they try to do, and I would be happy to answer any questions or talk further about this later on. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Yes, it was wonderful, and I see a lot that I saw here in Lagos in the tech hubs here. So now our next speaker is it's here with me. It's in real life. So it's Jovita Chinelo Ejimonje of the University of Nigeria. She's now a lecturer there, and she got her PhD in economics education at the University of Nsukka. And so if you can remember, if you want, you can stand up, but remember that you should speak close to this one. Okay. So the title of their intervention is the value of indigenous.
Okay, I can say that. I hope I'll be able to see it because I'm working with it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I should stay there. Okay.
Okay. The title of their intervention is
All right. That's better.
So the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you. Good morning, all. I'm here to present my paper, The Value of Indigenous Wisdom, the intersection of agricultural entrepreneurs, local knowledge, and technological innovation in Africa. And while they study, if you look at the problem of food security in Africa and the high rate of inflation, you will find out that there seems to be low productivity in agricultural industry. And if you look at the indigenous local knowledge, entrepreneurs' local knowledge, in Africa, we know that when we are small, there's a way we do our farm. There are certain things, certain rules and regulations that guide the local farmers, which made the production to be very, very high. And entrepreneurs' local knowledge is one of the prerequisites for a successful businessman in a society, because it is a knowledge that is transferred from one generation to another. And when you apply it, you see that our forefathers that taught us how to do such a thing knew the outcome, the positive outcome it will be. That is why it's good to maintain that local knowledge. Let me give you an example. Like you see, this is the local fowl in Africa. This local fowl, there is no special house for these fowls. Just a small place. The owner will just keep the fowl. In the morning when it is 6 o'clock, this fowl knew when it is 6 o'clock, the fowl will start shouting, telling people around that the day has break. And the owner will now go and open the door. The fowl will go out and search for the food and everything he likes. And you see that this fowl will be moving like this, and they will now raise their children, they have their chicks, and they take care of their chicks without any modern technology, without any special care. And that is the local knowledge, because the owner of this fowl has already trained the fowl. The time the fowl will come in, when it is 6 a.m., the fowl will go out. When it is 6 p.m., the fowl will come into the particular place in normal state. And this is the part of the meat we use in Africa, because this local fowl is so sweet. In Africa, they will know that it's so sweet because we train them with local food, and this local food is highly nutritious. And many people some local farmers have many of them, and they move in group and they come back in group. That's one of the knowledge, indigenous knowledge of this local fowl. And if you see this local fowl, if you look at it, if you start to give this local fowl feed, something like feed, which is artificial food, you see that the taste will definitely change. So some farmers used to intersect with both local feed and the modern one to get this particular species. Now, agricultural entrepreneurs in Africa utilize their knowledge, which is part of their culture, to improve their agricultural practices. I can remember when we are small, our mothers, fathers used to teach us how to farm. In that aspect, we don't need any tractor. You will go to school, and when you come back to school, you go to the farm. We have implement. Next slide, please. We have implement. And that implement, everybody must have his or her own implement, farm implement. Why they teach us how to do that is that, irrespective of the kind of job we are doing, you cannot leave farming. It's very, very important. And that's why if you look at the previous years in Africa, we don't have any problem about food, the food security. Each family has enough food you can eat. So you can even produce it by yourself, because God has blessed us in Africa that anything we plant will germinate without any chemical. So, and it is very, very important that that knowledge should be upheld each time and should be transferred from one generation to the another. Like I said, that local knowledge deals with communication, decision making. It is also culture of a particular people, which they transmit from one generation to another. If you look at the picture, see, this is the culture of this particular tribe. And you see how all of them are inside a farm, and you see what they're doing. Even their children go to the farm and see what their mothers and fathers is. So tomorrow, if they are not there, the children can take up that culture and continue. Next slide, please. Now, ADAM 219 defines local knowledge as a system that improves communication and decision-making in agriculture, environmental sustainability, production, and ecosystem, among others. This knowledge is very, very important. We communicate to our children. We'll tell them the need, because if you didn't teach them when they are small, when they grow up, they are not going to grow up with it. Just look at this. This is just local farmers. Everything they need is in the farm. They have farm, they have their land. And in Africa, in Africa, each family has land. And that land specifically is for cultivation. You use that land and cultivate what you eat, what you will use. And now in this modern age, some people used to sell it. Before, we have community farm. And community farm, each family, during the time, the whole family will go to the farm, or every family will go to that community farm and cultivate. It is one of the African culture. Every family should go to the community farm. Like in our own area, we normally have community farm. The whole community has that particular land for farming. Nobody, you cannot build any house on it. But when this time comes, like this rainy season, the whole family, everybody will go to the farm and cultivate what you like to eat. Most often, that is where we get the food we eat. Unless you have the excess, you can now sell to other people. Next slide, please. Now, see, this is one of the indigenous wisdom we have from our forefathers. This is our hole. This hole, each family has it. We have the big one, we have the small one. Each one has its own function. In Africa, when we are cultivating, our mold has its own size. Our forefathers taught us, if your own mold is not as the size that it should be, when you plant something there, that thing will not germinate well. And if germinated, the production will not be high. So we have a particular size. And we teach our children to make sure that as you are cultivating our parents will be telling us the size, which we have size for yam, we have size for maize, we have size for cassava. Each of them has its own size. And as you are cultivating, you have to bring the size. When you look at the size, you know whether you're going to plant the yam there, or to put your maize, or to put your cocoyam, or you put your cassava. So each size of the mold will determine the particular seed that will be planted there. These are indigenous wisdom. And you look at this family, see the mother, the mother and the father, and see that child. That child is learning. That child goes to farm with the parents and is learning, so that when the child grows up, the child will now take up the culture. That is the communication. Where is the communication comes from? And if you look at the family, this is the plants that has already germinated, and so they will go and monitor the farm. That is where we use the small hole. The small hole, you use it to remove the weeds, the small weeds, and make sure you take care of that seed, so that when it grows, because the way you take care of it, that determines the productivity of that particular plant. If you didn't take good care of that plant, the output will not be high. So this is one of the indigenous wisdom, and this wisdom needs to be transferred from one generation to another. If the children did not learn it, they will never continue with it. Next slide, please. Now, technology has now come up. Technology has come up. This technology now has made some of these local farmers to forget all this wisdom we have. Now, if you go, some families, they don't have that hole again, because some people use tractor. But even in Africa, how many people use tractor? Only a few people, because I know that some people, they can't even afford it or hire it. It's very costly. So that is one of the problems we have now. And because the tractor has come, and most foods are produced, and some of the seeds now they are not local seeds, the one we normally use. Some of them are GMO, and you use it and use the tractor and cut it. Please, next slide. So it's an issue. And if you look at when you use technology and incorporate the technology in agri, you see that you can get high productivity, which is, but the issue is that the problem is that does it have the same quality with the one we use the local wisdom and cultivate. Next slide, please. Now, the theory behind this is the theory of innovation diffusion theory, provided by the Everett Regas in 1962. This theory explains that when you bring indigenous wisdom into technology, in your business or in your agricultural product, the productivity should be very, very high. But the issue is that that indigenous wisdom is very, very important. And the theory is particularly relevant because it considers the role of local knowledge and the context in the adoption of the innovation in agri. No matter how technology comes, that indigenous wisdom is very, very important because you will see that at last, your productivity will be very, very high. But the problem is that we drop the indigenous wisdom and focus on the technology. That is where the problem is. Still now, people are dying in hunger because those, our forefathers that taught us how to do it are no longer there. And we, the new generation, can't even take up that knowledge they taught us and intersect it in technology. Next slide, please. Now, next slide, I have talked about the problem. The main objectives of this study is to assess the impact of indigenous agricultural wisdom on the adoption and adaptation of technological innovation among agricultural entrepreneurs in Africa, to exploit the role of indigenous agricultural practices in sustainable agricultural development and food security in Africa, to identify strategies for integrating indigenous wisdom. The next slide, please. Now, the methodology. So this study adopted descriptive survey design. Confidence sampling was used to collect the data. The instrument for the data was a questionnaire that answered the 3 research questions. Because I used questionnaire, I'm still going to use interview because the research is still on. I've just used the questionnaire. That's why let me work on the questionnaire first. Later, I will go for the interview. The regression analysis was used to examine the relationship between the variables. The variables of the items are used for the questionnaire. Next slide. Now, from the results, the types of agriculture, types is crop and animals. And you find out that in 12 people were for crops, while 23 animals. The next slide. Then female is 14. The respondents of my questionnaire, female, there are 21 female and the male 14. Next slide, please. Now, the research question 1 from the analysis I've done with the questionnaire, the results show that there is a significant positive impact on indigenous wisdom on adoption and adaptation of technological innovation among agricultural entrepreneurs in Africa. Because since the p-value of most of the items statement is below 0.05. What it means is that most agricultural entrepreneurs, they use indigenous wisdom in adoption, because some of them, they don't have tractor. If you don't have tractor and you can somehow to buy all these technological devices, equipment for agriculture is very, very costly. You don't have any reason rather to go back to your indigenous wisdom and you use it. The next slide, please. Then the research question 2 is that the role of indigenous agricultural practices is sustainable agricultural development and food security in Nigeria. The results show that the role of indigenous agricultural practice has no significant influence in sustainable agricultural development and food security in Africa, since the p-value of the most of the item statement is above 0.05. Yes, because what it means that, you see, those only how many people, just few people, and that few people, the output, you can't use it to generalize others, because few people are the ones that engage in intersection of indigenous wisdom and the agricultural. So there's no way the product will be enough for everybody. The next one. Now, the third one is that the strategies. And the result shows that the respondents agree with the strategies in item statements, such as awareness, current practices and experience, training programs government should support, among others, to enhance agricultural productivity. So for you to intersect this indigenous wisdom with technology, that should be awareness. And that should be programs, because when you teach them, they will be able to follow. Now, the findings reveals that those entrepreneurs who integrate local knowledge and technological innovation in their business have higher productivity outcomes than those who do not integrate local knowledge and technology. Now, another findings is that those entrepreneurs who integrate local knowledge with technological skills in their farming system are less than 50%. And this negatively affects agricultural productivity in African food security. The study recommends that the government should assist training assist in training entrepreneurs in technological skills for sustainable progress. Thank you for listening. All right.
Thanks very much.
Oh, coach.
All right. Thank you very much, Jovita.
Thank you.
All right. So our next speaker, if he's there, I hope so. It's Abaga Ikechukwu. Abaga, I hope you are listening to us now.
Abaga Ikechukwu is your turn to speak.
Otherwise, we will just move to the next and maybe make a spacing.
He's not
Your
there.
turn to speak, please.
Hey. He's not even hearing us. He's moved himself. Maybe another person.
Yes,
Maybe you can
yeah.
ask him to unmute.
He cannot hear. He cannot hear. He moved himself.
Yes, please just write him and maybe we will go with the next speaker and give him space afterwards. Okay. I'll send him an email too. Which would
Just
be
send him
the next
output.
speaker. All right. Okay. Abaga, we will give you time afterwards if you're listening to us, and I will give you space afterward. That's it. So we'll go with the next speaker for now, and which is Anna Osterloos of SciencePo. She's a PhD candidate at the Center of History, if I'm not wrong, of SciencePo. And her intervention, the title is The Most Modern Thing Happening in Nigeria, Early Computing and Ideas About Westernness, Africanness, and Modernity in Africa, 1960-1999. So the floor is yours. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so as I was already presented, I will just jump right into my presentation. So my article I discussed today and present some of the perspectives that I take up more largely in my PhD on the history of computing in Africa, more precisely Nigeria and Senegal in the 1960s until the late 1980s. So next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. So let me start with the title, The Most Modern Thing Happening in Nigeria, which is actually a citation from a TV show called Focus on Progress that was broadcasted in 1964 by the Nigerian Ministry of Information together with the US mission in Nigeria. And in this broadcast, the representative of the ministry announced this most modern thing happening in Nigeria and in the world. So what did she mean by that? She actually referred to a punch card computer from IBM, so a large mainframe computer that would occupy more than one room, and that was installed at the so-called African Education Center together with IBM at the University of Ibadan in 1963. And this computer center, the African Education Center, is one of the early computing projects I study in my research and in this article. Next slide. And the other computer project I discussed was 20 years later, so in the early 1980s in Dakar in Senegal at the École Normale Supérieure, also a very prestigious university. And 20 years later, this project established a computer training using microcomputers, so with keyboards and screens a bit more similar to what we know today. And both computer projects happened at very different times, so in the 60s, just after Nigeria's independence, and the project in Senegal in the 80s with the context of reorientations and decolonization of the education system in Senegal. And of course, the projects also took place at very different technical stages of the computer, so with mainframes in the 60s and microcomputers in the 80s. But there are also very interesting similarities between the two projects. Next slide. So there were both transnational computer projects.
I'm
the
sorry
one
to
in
interrupt you, but online I only see the opening slides.
Oh, okay. Maybe.
No slides at all.
Oh, okay. Thanks for letting us know.
Yes, they are working on it. We see the slides, but probably something technical here.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
about now?
now yes. Now yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there were both transnational computer projects. So the one in Ibadan, there was the cooperation with the US American computer company IBM World Trade and the university in Ibadan. And the project in Dakar, there was the American MIT that was involved, as well as the then called World Center for Computing in Paris in France, cooperating with the Senegalese team. Then both projects also involved people on very different levels. So there were scientists, computer experts, but also government authorities, teachers, lecturers, and then of course also the computer companies at that time in France and the US. So there were very different ideas, interests, and also imaginations of what computing or computer technology and the computer projects would bring about, what their objectives were. And it's these imaginations and sometimes very diverging ideas of the different actors in the projects, which I discuss in my article, to illustrate how early computing was imagined and approached in these two African countries, what ideas about culture, a certain Westernness of technology and identity were related to it. And so my work aims to respond to the gap in the literature of computer history, first by looking at computer history from African perspective, so focusing on African viewpoints through these projects, because there's still a lack of works on computer history in African countries, but also to question the general narratives in computing history and more largely history of technology that paint a picture of a kind of unilinear transfer of technology from the global north to the global south, kind of imposing the technology, but yet the two projects show that the spread of computing, I'm still there, was firstly not without tangents, so it was negotiated and it was circular and transnational, and especially it was not imposed. No, the slide before, I'm still not there. Go back again. Yeah, okay, thanks. Right, and lastly, my research aims to shift the focus in computer history from very often common stories of male white tech inventors in Western countries to actors who are often ignored in the literature, but actually shaped the development of computing and the spread of computer knowledge. Now the next slide. So the African Education Center, as IBM and the University of Ibadan called the center, was established in 1963. And had the objective of training around 50 students, or adult students, in data processing on this punch card computer. And as, for example, the TV broadcasts I mentioned shows, or also newspaper articles mention, the center was announced as very prestigious modern project, unique in the region and more largely in Africa, as it was IBM's first of such centers on the continent. And for Kenneth Dike, for example, the first Nigerian chancellor of the university at the time, it was crucial to demonstrate that there were, now that Nigeria was independent, higher education possibilities in the country that were of a very high and best quality. And he underlined that there was no need to study abroad or overseas, but encouraged students to study in Nigeria. And the center was kind of a proof that these diplomas now also exist in Nigeria. And then more largely, the computer center was explained as a tool to achieve the political goals of the new nation state, of independence, also of Pan-Africanism. So for example, in a student magazine of the IBM Center, computing is linked to securing independence of the country in that it was necessary to have a skilled Nigerian workforce so that no foreign experts were needed who would interfere in the country's affairs. So the idea that with the computer, it was Nigerians doing the development planning for Nigeria and not foreign experts who would come to the country. And there's also an interesting historical context, as there was a lot of American development planners in Nigeria at the time, which were increasingly questioned and also criticized. And then from another perspective, a mathematics lecturer of the center explained, for example, that the computer center was already in the spirit of the organization of African unity and was a symbol for African cooperation. And that's interesting because there were not only Nigerian students, but there were other English-speaking African students from other countries. And the idea was that they would experience the spirit of living together, cooperating, which they would then also continue in the future when they were all at higher political levels. And so the computer center and this knowledge of computing was understood as a means of securing the political and economical goals of the country. And this was also the type of modernity that was imagined in connection to computing. So this vision of independence, African cooperation, and economic prosperity. Next slide. Now, the project that took place 20 years later in the 1980s in Dakar equally imagined computing in relation to the needs of Senegal, but more largely also other African countries. And the project also took place at the university, but actually worked with school children, so students from primary schools who would come to the computer laboratory and learn how to program on a microcomputer. And so since this was already in the 80s, the computers worked with a software with which they would learn programming. And this was the American programming language Logo, developed by Seymour Papert at the MIT. And what is interesting in this project is that the team in Dakar, and especially the team leader, argued for the need to adapt the software and also the hardware to Senegalese culture. So, for example, the team developed a Senegalese version of the software that worked with commands in Wolof, which is one of the main languages spoken in Senegal, and that was based on Senegalese cultural patterns. Next slide. So to make this a bit more visible. So there's one version of the learning software where children could design a landscape called microworlds. And you see on the left side, there's the American version, which the Senegalese team then changed to a village scene for the Senegalese version on the right side. And moreover, the Senegalese project members argued at conferences and also within the project cooperation for the need to produce computers which would be able to deal with climatic conditions in Senegal. So, for example, intense heat or humidity and dust. And the team leader proposed a regional African institution where African experts would develop norms that computer firms had to comply with if they wanted to export their products or their computers to African countries. And from this perspective, computers were regarded on one hand as Western products that had inherent the danger of imposing values. But on the other hand, they could be adapted and made Senegalese. So one of the goals was also to show Wolof as a language that was both traditional or related to home for the children, but also something associated with modern technology. And so for the Senegalese project, computing was seen as a potential for the country, but at the same time, it had to be adapted to Senegalese culture and realities. And there's also a larger historical background to this perspective because there were especially political efforts at the time to reorient the education system away from its colonial past, rooting it in a Senegalese culture, and also efforts to make or to build a stronger national identity. But because of keeping time, I will move on to my concluding observations. So clearly, the two African universities emerged as sites where computing was rethought and debated. And rather than a diffusion of computer technology from north to south, it becomes clear that the African actors shaped how computing spread in Africa and globally. And they provided African visions of what computing would mean for their cultures, for their societies, and their futures.
Thank you very much. All right. Okay. Again, thank you very much, Anna. Okay, here we are. So, Catherine, if you are fine, we go with you, and then we ask the badger. Okay. So now it's the turn of Catherine Pai. She is an associate professor and research coordinator at the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology at KU Leuven. She's also a scientific supervisor for the Lagos Tech project. And the title of their intervention, which is different from the one that we have maybe in the printed program, is Culture, Complex, and Tech Design in Contemporary Kinshasa. Where complex, so, I think it's
complex. It's in the French version.
Exactly, in the French version. So
yeah, we don't see the PowerPoint.
Is coming up now.
Okay, now it is. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you for organizing this, Davide. I regret that I can't be in Lagos. This is a very, busy time period in Belgian academia. This is the weeks of the exams, so difficult to travel. But I'm very happy that through the technology that we're studying, that I'm still able to participate and to join in the conversation. So indeed, the title of my presentation has changed. If you're interested in the material of the original title, you can send me an email. I can share the PDF. It's an article that has been published in 2021. Now I'm presenting material that probably fits more the overall discussion. You will actually see many overlaps with Tessa's presentation and the last presentation. So I think it's going to facilitate discussion afterwards more. So I want you to go to the next slide, please. So I've been studying the community of tech designers in Kinshasa, and today I want to approach the production of local tech products from the angle of the culture of the concept of cultural intimacy as defined by Hertzfeld, which is the recognition of those aspects of a cultural identity that are considered a source of external embarrassment, but that nevertheless provide insiders with their assurance of common sociality, end of quote. And in Kinshasa, there's a concept to indicate this cultural identity as a source of external embarrassment, and that is le complexe. Let me provide a graphic vignette of a conversation with a young man marketing a smartwatch, the Nuvens smartwatch, invented by Ken Kelvin Mbaz, a Congolese by birth, but living and working in Brazil. The conceptualization and assemblage of the smartwatch, the Nuvens smartwatch, happens in Brazil and South Korea. In August 2019, when I first learned about this invention and did some research on it, the Nuven watch was being sold in Kinshasa for $150, which means out of reach for the majority of the inhabitants of Kinshasa.
And then Lagos happened. Well, Nigeria. Nepal.
Unless you have solar. You have solar, fine. Solar.
There they are. Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. We understood this. Could you maybe go back to the PowerPoint?
Yes, we are. They are doing it, hopefully.
Yeah. So I'm not going to start all over again. I'm just, going to start from the paragraph that we were interrupted in. Okay.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Sorry.
No, it's
Nigeria.
Let's call it technology.
Technology.
Okay.
That is Nigeria.
Yeah. Okay, so I had started giving this vignette about the smartwatch, the Nuven smartwatch, and at the time of my interview of my meetings with Prince, who is the brother of the Congolese guy who lives in Brazil, who designed and assembles the smartwatch. At that time, only 5 Nuven watches had been sold at $150. 2 had gone to patients, 3 others were bought by politicians. The politicians had purchased the device out of curiosity and in an effort to support local entrepreneurs. And Prince imitated the reaction of one of the politicians when he had handed him the device. One of them had said, "Oh," but in French, and I'm translating in English, "Ah,
The Wi-Fi. Yeah.
police can choose between, oh yeah, we're still on the opening slides. So go back to the second slide, please. You're already on this.
This.
No, give everything away now. Just a second. Go back, go back. Yeah, no, the second, that was it. No, the second one, yeah, voila. So Prince had said, if Congolese can choose between European design and African design, they will go for European design. People do not believe that Congolese have the capacity to create, to produce something durable, end of quote. Such statements echoed utterances I've heard ever since I began ethnographic fieldwork in Kinshasa in 2003. A similar stance was expressed by Thérèse Kirongozi, who is the woman here you see on the other picture. She is the charismatic leader of an engineering team that created traffic robots with a human shape and which attracted a lot of international attention, and some of you may know about them. During one of our trips, so I would often accompany Thérèse to the workshop where the robots were assembled. During one of our trips to the workshop, she had insisted that I would join her because she had an appointment with a British female journalist, a freelance journalist. And the journalist hardly spoke a word of French, but prepared a feature story about the invention of her, humanoid traffic robots. And she was going to produce this feature story for British television channels. Thérèse Kirongozi wanted me to be around and to translate for the journalist when necessary. And when she then introduced me to the journalist, she jokingly said to the journalist that I was like many foreigners, curious to see Congolese who can actually think and do science, end of quote. Thérèse's joke was not innocent. It rehearsed a common trope among Kinshasa's innovators and tech engineers, a trope that exudes a regret that they are not considered to be real engineers. It's a trope one often hears in Kinshasa, where the word qui ingénieur is often used when talking about local inventions that do not last or do not live up to their expectations. The prefix qui is used in slang to associate the stereotypes of Quinois from Kinshasa, Quinois identity, meaning, frauds, bluffers, tricksters. Then, and that prefix is then attached to words for particular professions, like a key engineer, a fraudulent, bluffing, trickster kind of engineer, a key politicien, a fraud, a bluffing, trickster-like politician, a key pasteur, a fraud, a bluffer, a kind of trickster-like pastor. It's a derogatory way of speaking about local experts, but it resonates with the depreciative stance many Quinois take on local products, and when they reflect on Kinshasa's outward gaze, what Bayard would call extraversion. For Bayard, extraversion is an essential, acclaimed characteristic of African societies. Yet when Quinois tech entrepreneurs reflect on the higher value, monetary and symbolically, that Quinois attribute to things foreign, then this extraversion becomes a problem. It's a language that is not unique to the discourse of technologists, but it's also invoked in a variety of ways in Quinois society. In that regard, Quinois experts never tire of repeating that Congolese are complexés. They have a complex. We are suffering of un complexe, an inferiority complex d'infériorité. And a complexé is a word, that's a kind of insult, that you often hear. It would denote a person feeling a sense of inferiority. But I prefer to read it as a symptom of cultural alienation. A complexé is apparent in, and a complex is apparent in Quinois' appreciation of language. French is more prestigious than Lingala, for example. The elite sends their children to schools where they only can communicate in French. They want their children to gain a French accent, not the Lingala French accent, for example. But the complex, so it's apparent in the appreciations of language. It's also apparent, when talking about technological devices, spare parts for cars, radio sets, household utensils. The traffic robots mentioned earlier are sometimes ridiculized, especially by young Quinoa who aspire a Western cosmopolitan lifestyle. They depreciate the traffic robots for being too far removed from the prototypical image of a traffic light. In such perspective, a hierarchy exists in the ways in which certain devices are valued based on their assumed origin. Many Quinoa prefer devices from European, American, or Japanese origin and undervalue, even disdain, anything produced locally. The experience of cultural alienation has been the subject of numerous scholarly and activist publications. Frantz Fanon, arguably one of the most important intellectual voices in the anti-colonial struggle, had observed that an inferiority complex had arisen among colonized peoples, and Fanon rigidly denunciated the cultural alienation that colonialism installed. Next slide, please. The cultural alienation also seeps into the political and economic spheres in the 21st century. It also, and in the tech sphere in Kinshasa as well. And here I'm now going to the large quote, which is by a young tech engineer who sent this in an audio message to a WhatsApp group of the tech engineers in Kinshasa. In Africa, he said, and he was speaking in French, with a pretty French accent. In Africa, the problem is not that people are lacking vision. No, what Zook, and this is Mark Zuckerberg, what Zook has done, mainly people have done in Africa as well. It's nothing. You just need to use servers. The problem is the complex. If one of us produces something, he will not get the support of his family nor friends. They will prefer what Europeans have made. Maestro Gyms has made Xcash. It's the same as PayPal. But if we do not use Xcash, then Xcash will never get the same magnitude as PayPal. So do not repeat anymore that here in Africa we're not smart enough or that we are lacking a vision. We are complexé. We do not support one another. And along their regrets and laments about Congolese society being complexé, Kinshasa's tech creatives themselves want to produce a new narrative. Along with an Africa Rising trope, apparent all over the globe, Quinoa engineers and makers display a strong sense of pride and conviction about their technical capacities and capabilities, to the extent that much of their engineering efforts and experiments are often captured in narratives about patriotic contributions to the national economy and to the building of an international reputation of the brand RD Congo, Congo. So next slide, please. The Africa Rising era seems to provide a momentum to fill the industrial vacuum Otonji wrote about so many years ago. And actually, there was a quote on the previous slide. There was a quote by Otonji. Could we actually go back to the previous slide? I want to read out Otonji's quote. So in 1990, he wrote, "In the overall process of the production of knowledge, colonies functioned as immense data banks, as storehouses of bare facts and information that were exported to the ruling country, just as they used to serve as storehouses of raw materials that were exported to the same ruling country." End of quote. Can we go back to slide 4 now? So the Africa... So Otonji wrote about an industrial vacuum, about the colonial and early post-colonial period. And so the Africa Rising era nowadays seems to provide a momentum to fill that industrial vacuum. In Kinshasa, various international initiatives have sprung up in the wake of an Africa Rising atmosphere. As from 2012, hackathons and events such as Kinshasa Innovative Days have been organized. Co-working spaces to be used by aspiring tech entrepreneurs such as, and there are many, Digital Kinshasa, Ingenious City, and Fab Labs such as Lumumba Lab and others have popped up. These are financially and logistically supported by public and private capital, but mainly coming from international embassies, international NGOs, and international foundations. These institutions and organizations turn towards the digital for development, D4D, and aim to produce new disruptive futures. Such initiatives are socially meaningful because they nourish the dream of a new form of development, They revalue the role of engineers in Quinoa society. They inspire individual prospects and unleash conversations about national patriotic contributions. Next quote, please. Quinoa technologies are actually here on the same line as the Congolese state. More than the music world, which is the next slide, please. More than the music world, which is the classic space of promotion of Congo pride, the tech world is nowadays the sphere of choice in Quinoa society, where Quinoa, and politicians included, think about the 3 Nuvens watches that have been bought, actively invest in Congo pride. An early manifestation of this is the slogan Made in RDC, and online the hashtag Made in RDC, which has gained political significance and is used by institutional actors, Congolese state actors, the Congolese press, Congolese tech innovators, but also lay people in Kinshasa. The slogan Made in RDC was invented as part of a political project of the Kabila state between 2009 and 2019, intended to awaken the local economy and to boost local inventions. Congolese inventors, both in Kinshasa, elsewhere in Congo, and in the diaspora, are defining their designs as made in RDC as well, as is evidenced by the Nuven smartwatch mentioned earlier. So I'm going to end here. Thank you for your attention. I hope that the tech glitch has not interrupted too much in, the thread of my narrative.
Thank you very much, Shobra. I found it very interesting, and yeah, I think we got it anyways, despite the technical issues here. So now I don't know if Abaga is here, but also I think we cannot go over 10:45, right? So maybe nice.
He's not there. Still doing himself.
And during the 4 moments that we were alone in the room, he never, communicated with us either. So we guess he's not at his screen, or they are not at their screen.
So let's open the floor for questions, because I mean we are basically at the end of the panel. So let's open the floor for questions to here in real life or virtually. I think somehow all of the papers were really connected one to another in a way, one another. I mean, we got even the historical contribution is part of that. We got a perspective on many things. So if somebody wants to otherwise, I quickly go with a question to test at least. Well, but it's more a curiosity, because obviously everything we talk about it remembered me something that I saw here in Lagos these 3 months. So Tess, I would like to ask if in your research in Accra, in the period in which you were doing fieldwork, in the different tech hubs where you went, which was the most common type of app that they were developing, these elites? Because yes, I think you were right in calling them elites in a way. But so in which kind of apps they were even focusing? Because here I see a pattern, but I don't know if it's something that is happening everywhere, and I don't know if it's something that is happening always. So maybe in your case it was different. If you are not frozen. Okay, you are there.
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part of your sentence. Could you please repeat that?
No, sorry, because I saw you were frozen, but I mean, I guess you get my question. I mean, which kind of apps they were mostly developing? Category of apps, let's say.
So actually, in my case, entrepreneurs were mostly focused on developing apps in the 2014 and 15 period when I did my master research. And that is when apps like mobile applications were all the hype in Ghana as the new promise for like entrepreneurial success. But by 2018 and 19, many entrepreneurs in my cohort had learned that mobile applications actually were not the way forward for tech entrepreneurship in Ghana, because the mobile applications that they developed for the local market were not really used and the ones that they developed for international markets also were not really used. So many of them shifted away to different business models, and the entrepreneurs that did develop apps usually were entrepreneurs that were just starting out and still believed in these promises that are told in the like public discourse. And the apps that are part of my study, I have interpreted them as part of platform businesses, and I have not really focused on different kinds of mobile applications in a way that you might mean. I'm not really sure what you mean with different kinds of
Like
apps. Do you mean different markets or different like business functions or?
if they, I mean, for what I understood here, there were periods in which everybody was developing, for example, education apps or otherwise apps about, I don't know, fintech or anything else. So I don't know in your period of research
Well,
if they were
yeah,
focusing on some particular category or not.
so in my cohort, there were people doing like education apps, or I would say education platforms, fintech. We focused on agriculture because there was a lot of Dutch/Canadian investment coming into that area. And also some, like I've worked with a game development company for a while, but that tends to be a bit niche. And people into like healthcare and kind of beauty apps and e-commerce. I've had all sorts of apps, but generally the sentiment was that just developing an app as the core of your business was not the way forward.
Okay, okay, I understand. Thank you very much, Tessa.
You're
And
welcome.
no, if somebody else amongst the speakers or the audience has some question besides me.
If not, I have a question.
Yes, please.
To my first speaker, actually, because I found this very interesting, this idea of bringing the local knowledge or the local wisdom, valuing it and mixing it with technology. Oh, yeah, sorry. So I found it really interesting, this idea of mixing the local or valuing the local knowledge and mixing it with technology. And I wonder if you have examples how, if I understood it right, how this integration happened, or how the farmers you researched, how they combined this technology and local knowledge, like ways of combining the two. Maybe you have some examples you could share.
Okay. An example of this intersection is that in terms of storage seed, there are indigenous way we store our seeds. Like some of these seeds, like maize, sometimes we keep them in a house. Maize, we keep them in a kitchen that has chimney to keep the corn till the next year. Instead of using chemical on top of it to preserve the pest, you cannot keep it in a kitchen that has chimney, and nothing will happen to it to the next farming season. The next farming season, you can now use it and plant. Now, recently, some people use insecticides to preserve the corn against the next year. Some will have modern equipment where they can keep it to preserve it. And sometimes I feel that there is an effect on that seed, because some of them are eventually, when you plant them, the productivity will be very low. Very well. But I found out that when you use the local way, which our forefathers taught us how to preserve most of these seeds, you see that the productivity will be very, very high, and you have a good special of the seeds. So when there is low turnout in agriculture, you see that it is really a problem to food security, because the output will be very, very low. And again, that seeds, you can preserve it in the local way using the local indigenous wisdom we have, and still use tractor or other modern farming equipment to plant them. Then in terms of the mold, which I said earlier, the size of the mold, and I believe that it affects, because the modern way of planting these seeds using tractor and other technological equipment really affects the productivity actually. Even if we're going to use tractor, we need to make the size to be the same size our forefathers taught us. Like example, if you want to plant a yam, that is size of the mold for a yam. Whether the tractor or the modern equipment will be able to give us that particular size of the yam. And the cassava has its own size, and other seeds has their own size. You're welcome. I hope you are okay.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Somebody has a question?
Okay. Well, I think, yeah, we have time for at least another question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, although I missed your presentation, but I really actually came for that, the whole aspect of debating authenticity and what's local. And from what you have said, I always wonder why on this part of the world, we talk about indigenous knowledge as something in the past, as something with our forefathers, and which therefore negates modern methods of knowledge, because we fail to account for the passage of time with every kind of innovation and development over time. Because even when you talk, for example, on food systems of what we have here in Africa today, a lot of this actually is colonial imports. What we are eating today, even as traditional food like yam, has been improved from the 1950s. It is a product of years of scientific advancement. So where does the indigenous and the local begin and end vis-a-vis the modern? Or shouldn't we be looking at African knowledge as progressive, like other civilizations' knowledge are progressive? So we don't always have to look back for authenticity, but we can develop what we have even as we proceed with it. Thank you.
I think that was for you.
Oh, okay. Now, like I said earlier, the intersection there, the local knowledge is already there. That is the one we have. And even the present age generation, some of them don't have it because these young mothers, most of them have lost that indigenous knowledge our forefathers taught us. And that's why we focus more on technology, because in our generation, we believe that technology has come to stay. And therefore, everybody goes into technology. Well, then we have to ask ourselves questions. What is effect? Or what is the output, the analysis, or how do we examine the productivity we have before the technology comes into system? And the intersection means that when you intersect with indigenous wisdom with this present technology, you see that there will be a new knowledge and a new idea of production.
Knowledge be contemporary?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's knowledge can actually be contemporary. It doesn't have to be the past.
Yeah.
So even younger Nigerians today have indigenous knowledge. That doesn't have to be the knowledge of the past.
It's actually, but that should be passed from one generation to the other. We cannot forget about it. It still exists. Those knowledge exist. We cannot forget about it.
So let me give space to Tessa because it's online, and I think especially the one online is going to cut sooner. So yes, Tessa, if you can. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I had two questions, one for Anna. So I think your research is so fascinating, really interesting. And I was wondering, because you talked about the transnational focus of these projects, if you know if there are similar sort of computing projects in other West African countries or maybe on the African continent, and if these engineers, computer scientists collaborated or communicated with each other. That was one question for you. And then for Katrien, you mentioned Van Non and cultural difference. And I was wondering, why do you frame that as cultural difference and do not talk about race?
Okay. So Anna first.
Thank you for your question. So yeah, I think there were other projects, especially from IBM. So the one in Ibadan was the first of this kind, but they established similar centers. IBM had very much of these centers around the world, and they framed it more special. These centers they established in Africa. But I'm not sure, for example, the project which I look at in Dakar, so there were doing similar projects in trying to establish similar projects in other African countries, but I haven't for now looked so much into them and how efficient they were, or if they really worked out. What is interesting, I found a connection actually, but that is very new. It's just from what I found a few weeks ago in the archives. So there was actually a connection between the IBM Center in Ibadan and plans to establish a similar center in Senegal in the end of the 60s. But yeah, for now, I don't have more information about it.
Thank you.
Catherine, if you can be very quick because they are kicking us out.
So I just want to ask a question.
Yeah, well, this is a summary of a longer text that I have in which I do talk about race, but I don't want to emphasize. So race is a discourse in Kinshasa, but I think what is beyond, the race is the surface. What is beyond the race is the cultural difference. And so, it's a global North, global South thing. It's a colonial, post-colonial thing. It's a colonial, colonizer, colonized relationship. It's beyond the racial difference. So that's the short answer.
Okay.
Thank you to Davide for your organization of this panel. And Anna, I enjoyed your paper also a lot, and I wish you all the best with your PhD. And Tessa, we know each other. We've been following each other for a while now, so it was good.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you. So there were other questions, but the time ran out, so maybe we can do some discussion outside. And you can contact anyway the speakers even online through email. They will be happy to reply to you. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for being here today.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.